Rhythm on the Reservation is really terrible, and it's really rare for me to say that about a Betty Boop cartoon. This is a 1939 Betty Boop cartoon. It's directed by Dave Fleischer and Myron Waldman, with a voice cast including Margie Hines and Jack Mercer. And Betty Boop visits some Native Americans, and she shows them some instruments. She's got this swing band, but it's just her. There are no other musicians. And she takes these instruments, and the Native Americans see the instruments, and they don't know how to use the instruments. And Betty Boop teaches them how to use the instruments, and they make music. That is the whole narrative. And there are several things wrong with this. The first is a depiction of the Native Americans. The characters are definitely portrayed as having less intelligence than Betty Boop. We see this because they tried to get some comedy out of what they were doing with the instruments. And what I will say is there's a good variety of musical instruments. I think that worked well because it meant that they were presenting different situations. It's just unfortunate that the situations themselves are really uncomfortable to watch as we watch these characters being portrayed as, quite frankly, idiots who are just doing ridiculous things with these instruments because they don't understand what they're for. And sure, there will be people who have never seen certain instruments, so they might not know exactly what it's for, but I'm pretty sure they know it's not for pumping water. That's what they were using the accordion for. So that's the first thing that's wrong with it. The second is the animation. Now, actually, I was going to say to the cartoon's credit, I don't know if it's so much in the cartoon's credit, but the actual physical appearance of the Native American characters is not that bad. I've seen some pretty terrible depictions, almost caricatures of Native Americans in cartoons from around this time. But actually, the animation of those characters is not too bad, but the animation as a whole is pretty terrible, both in terms of the characters all just seeming void of any personality, including Betty Boop. I just didn't feel like any of the characters were interesting. I didn't care about any of them because I really didn't get a sense of any of their personalities, including Betty Boop. Had this been my first ever Betty Boop cartoon, I would have found her to be very bland. And that means that I wasn't interested in any of the characters' journeys. I wasn't connecting with any of them. And then we have awkward depictions of some other characters, and we're still not getting a good sense of their personality or who they are as people. They're just basically being used as a way to poke fun at certain people, and it doesn't work at all. But even Betty Boop doesn't really have much of a personality here, which again is unusual. Usually she's a very well written character, really likable, really interesting. Absolutely not the case here. The music it's fine, but for a cartoon that's all about rhythm, I didn't think it was that interesting. But I'm not that musical. I don't have a good musical ear. To somebody else, it might be brilliant. That's absolutely fine. But to me, I didn't find it very engaging. I wasn't swaying along to it. Nothing like that. So what does this cartoon have to offer? Honestly, nothing. It's really, really unusual for me to not find a positive thing to say about a Betty Boop cartoon. I'm a huge Betty Boop fan. But with this one, the animation isn't good. And it's not just the people either. The animation of the background, there's just nothing in this that's interesting to look at. Some of the instruments have an okay animation design, but not enough to save the cartoon. The characters are either bland or made to look inferior to Betty Boop, which is not a good way to do things. And the narrative itself is just very dull. So unfortunately, and surprisingly, as a Betty Boop fan, I'm going to have to say that Rhythm on the Reservation is absolutely not one that I recommend.